First function of the law: to convince of sin. So that all of this may be more clearly understood, let us set down in summary form the role and function of the law, which, so far as I can judge, consists of 3 parts. The first is that in revealing the righteousness of God, the righteousness, that is, which He approves, the law alerts each of us to our unrighteousness, and makes it so certain that it brings conviction and condemnation. For man, who is otherwise blinded and drunk with self-love, must be compelled to recognize and confess both his weakness and impurity. If his vanity is not openly rebuked, he is puffed up with foolish confidence in his own powers, and cannot be brought to acknowledge how small and feeble they are when he judges them for himself. When, however, he tests his powers and finds how hard it is to keep God's law, he has reason to humble his pride. For however highly he once thought of his powers, he now feels how greatly they are burdened by a load so heavy that they totter, waver, fall, and finally fail. Thus man, instructed by the teaching of the law, retreats from the overweening pride of which he is naturally full. He must also be purged of the other vice of arrogance of which we have already spoken. For as long as he looks only to his own judgment, he conjures up, instead of true righteousness, a hypocrisy which he happily flaunts in defiance of God's grace, on the basis of a few rights dreamed up by himself. But when he is obliged to judge his life by the measure of God's law, abandoning his false view of righteousness, he finds that he is unimaginably far from true holiness, but is, on the contrary, full of those faults of which he once believed he was clear. Evil desires are so hidden and twisted that they readily deceive man's sight. The apostle very rightly says that he would not have known what evil desire was unless the law had said, "You shall not covet." For if it is not revealed by the law and dragged from its hiding place, desire slays unhappy men without their feeling anything. Accordingly, the law is like a mirror in which we contemplate first our weakness, then the evil which results from it, and finally the curse, which is a combination of the two. It is the same as when we see the blemishes on our face in a mirror. For the person who lacks the ability to live righteously can do nothing but remain mired in sin. So the greater the transgression which the law lays to our charge, the more worthy of condemnation and punishment it shows us to be. That is what the apostle means when he says that through the law comes knowledge of sin. There he defines the first function of the law as revealed to unregenerate sinners. The same idea is conveyed also by these texts. The law came in so as to increase sin. It is the dispensation of death, which brings God's wrath and slays us. There is no doubt that the more deeply the conscience is troubled by the recognition of its sin, the more iniquity also grows, because transgression is accompanied by rebellion against the lawgiver. In consequence, the law arms God's vengeance to bring about the sinner's doom, since all it can do is accuse, condemn, and destroy. As Augustine says, if the spirit of grace is taken away, the law serves merely to accuse and to kill. Now to say that is not to impugn the law, nor to detract in any way from its worth. It is true that if our will was wholly based on obedience to the law and governed by it, it would be enough to be familiar with its teaching in order to be saved. But since our nature, being corrupt and carnal, is squarely opposed to God's spiritual law and cannot under its direction reform itself, it follows that the law, which, had we accepted it, was given for our salvation, becomes for us a cause of sin and death. For because we are all convicted of transgressing the law, the more it shows us God's righteousness, the more it reveals our iniquity. The more it attests the reward prepared for righteousness, the more it assures us of the ruin prepared for evildoers. Thus, far from impugning the law by speaking as we do, we could offer no better commendation of God's goodness. From this we clearly see that it is only our willfulness which prevents us from attaining the eternal bliss offered us in the law. Accordingly, we have reason to accept as an even greater favor God's grace, which, when the law fails, comes to our aid, and to love all the more his mercy which bestows this grace on us. For we know that he never tires of doing good to us, and always heaps blessing upon blessing. The fact that our sin and condemnation are certified and sealed by the law's testimony is not meant to plunge us into despair, to discourage us, or to consign us to our doom. That will not happen provided we use the law to our best advantage. The wicked indeed suffer in this way, but that is because of their stubborn hearts. The children of God, however, should aim for something else, to heed the words of Paul when he affirms that we are all condemned by the law, so that every mouth may be shut and the whole world held accountable to God. Again, in another place, he teaches that God has included all things in unbelief, not to destroy nor even to allow all to perish, but to have mercy on all. His purpose, then, is that men, renouncing all belief in their own strength, should acknowledge that it is only his hand that sustains them, and that wholly naked and empty-handed they should take refuge in his mercy, trusting it completely, hiding in its shade, relying on it alone for righteousness and merit. Such is the mercy made manifest in Jesus Christ for all who seek, desire, and wait for it with true faith. For in the law, the Lord is revealed as the rewarder only of perfect righteousness, of which we are all devoid. Conversely, he shows himself to be the harsh enforcer of the penalties which our faults deserve. In Christ, however, his face shines upon us full of grace and sweetness, despite the fact that we are poor, unworthy sinners. Augustine often speaks of the teaching by which the law encourages us to beg God's help. He therefore says, the law commands so that, being forced to obey its commandments and failing through our infirmity, we may learn to entreat God's aid. Again, the usefulness of the law is that it convinces man of his weakness and compels him to seek the medicine of grace which is in Christ. Again, the law commands, and grace gives the strength to do what is right. Again, God commands what we cannot do, so that we may know what we should ask of him. As to the second advantage of the law, he describes it less explicitly, perhaps because he thought that one could be inferred from the other, or because he was somewhat undecided. Although the law's usefulness, as we have described it, properly applies to the children of God, it is common also to the reprobate. For although they do not, like believers, despair of the flesh in order to receive strength in the Spirit, but instead wholly faint through dread and despondency, it is nevertheless good, to demonstrate the fairness of God's judgment, that their consciences should feel such torment. For they always try as best they can to evade God's judgment, but while his judgment may not be openly displayed, nevertheless, they are so humbled by the witness both of the law and of their conscience that they openly reveal what it is they have deserved.